But hey, we're really excited about having Ray Kelly here. He's with Synopsys, and he is going to be covering how to STUXNET and how to unravel the cyber weapon that shaped history. So Ray Kelly has over 25 years of development experience in internet security. He has been involved in several successful cybersecurity startups and currently serves as a fellow at Synopsys, contributing to research and the security product line. So will you help me welcome Ray?
Thank you. Appreciate it. Is this thing on? Can you guys hear me? All right. Yes, thank you for coming to my talk today. We're going to talk about STUXNET. Just a show of hands, who knows anything about STUXNET? A little bit. Anyone never heard of it, or kind of, no? Okay, so everyone's fairly familiar, so that's good. Like the intro, thank you for that. Been doing application security for over 20 years through several companies, Spy Dynamics, HP, Micro Focus, at Synopsys now, and for until the end of this week, and then we will be Black Duck starting next week. So that's coming on the horizon for us. I work on automated scanners, usually on the DAS side of things. I love DAS. I got a tattoo on my chest that says "Born to DAS," so I really like it. I do speak at conferences. This is the first time I haven't done a talk on AppSec in some way, so this is really outside of what I normally do, but I do like a good story. So, a couple of things here. Number one is, I'm not sure how you guys pronounce the country, Iran or Iran. In Europe, it's Iran, and usually in America, it's Iran. My mom is European, she's German. My dad is American, so I hear both versions of it. And it's kind of weird, like how often do you hear that word, right? But we actually lived in Iran in 1978. I was probably about 7 or 8 years old. During the time the Iranians had a revolution and overthrew the Shah of Iran. We were evacuated overnight, sat on the floor of a Pan Am flight left overnight. So heard that word a lot, Iran, Iran. This is based on a true story. So imagine everything that I say, put allegedly after it. To this day, no one has taken official credit for STUXNET, right? There's plenty of research. We're pretty sure we know who it is and how it happened. In my research, there was a lot of information. Some of it conflicting. Everyone has their own versions of it. So this is kind of my take on it. And so take what you will. At the end, during the Q&A, be happy to hear if people have other tidbits that would be interesting. Please do bring them up, because there is just so much information out there on this topic. Before we get to that, though, talking about old school espionage. So before there was cyber warfare, we had electronic warfare, or maybe analog warfare, whatever you want to call it. And just a couple of examples that I found fascinating. One of them is a paper shredder. And so in Washington, D.C., during the Cold War, probably in the 70s, there was a hotel near the White House where all famous dignitaries would stay, whether you're president or king, princes, what have you. And in that hotel room, they were kind enough to provide their tenants with a paper shredder, because when you're important, you need to shred your papers on there. But these paper shredders were made by a 3-letter acronym from our government. I'm not sure which one it was, CIA, probably. And what they had done was built a document scanner in the top where the shredder was. So as they were shredding their documents, we were scanning it, right, and reading everything. They were actually sending it over. Of course, there's no Wi-Fi or network connectivity. They were using the electrical cord, and what they would do is basically pulse the power draw over the electrical cord, almost like an old school modem. And they were rebuilding the documents in another room in the hotel where they were reading that. So I was like, that is awesome. Another example. This one had a kind of a personal meaning to me. It was kind of funny. So Operation Ivy Bells. Again, this is back in the 70s, Cold War era. And between the US Navy, CIA, NSA, bunch of folks, and what we were doing is wiretapping the Soviet Union. And we found cables underneath the sea, and let me go back over here for a second. So you can see where there's a peninsula coming out, and instead of, obviously you don't want to have to run cable, all the way around your continent to get from one place to the other, they would just lay a cable across the ocean. And so what our subs were doing, our subs were going over there and laying these devices on top of there that could listen to all the communications going over those lines. This is actually my dad. So he was in the Navy for 20 years. And so this is probably in the 2000s, mid-2000s. And I was watching the History Channel back when they actually showed shows on history instead of Storage Wars or whatever. And they were covering this. And so I called my dad and said, hey, Dad, do you know anything about this Operation Ivy Bells? And there was a pause on the line, and he didn't say anything. And then it seemed like forever, but after a few seconds, he goes, how do you know about that? I said, I'm watching it on TV. He goes, and then he told me what he did. I never actually knew what he did, just cruised around under the water, doing stuff. But he was what they call a yeoman on a submarine, which is basically the paperwork guy. And so on his subs, they would go over there, and he actually kept the tapes that they pulled out of these devices in the safe in his safe in the submarine. And so that was really cool when I heard about that. It's like, man, why didn't you tell me about that before? He thought he was still sworn to secrecy. So that was a pretty cool story. You can see the device on the right-hand side. This thing was huge. It was like the size of a big refrigerator that they had. The Russians found out about it, though, because there was a traitor named Ronald Pelton, and he was NSA and turned into a mole, and he turned over our secrets to the Russians, including this operation specifically. And I gotta fast forward here. Let's see. Yeah, so he turned them over. And so the Russians found this device, and of course, they pull it up, and they're trying to figure, hey, let's go get this thing. And, USA was kind of playing dumb, like, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, when they took apart the devices, all the the IC chips, all the components in there, made in the USA. And so it was kind of hard to deny the role that we had, and of course, all the paperwork that they stole. To this day, he is known as the most prolific, it's the biggest espionage campaign America has ever had because of this guy, with all the secrets that he turned over. He was sentenced to prison 3 life terms in 1986. And he actually died in prison 2 years ago. So that guy. And anyone want to take a stab how much he made off of this? What the Russians paid him? Throw out a wild number. $35,000 is what he got for turning over our secrets. All right, so let's fast forward. Now we're into cyber warfare. Let me see. By the way, I just want to mention too, if anyone's curious about these submarine operations that were happening, actually, I backed up on my screen. You can look up Blind Man's Bluff, and it's on YouTube. You can watch it. It's a documentary about these types of operations and things that we were doing during the Cold War. So it's a pretty fascinating documentary. So fast forwarding, in 2005, Ahmadinejad was elected president of Iran. And when he was elected, he came right out and said, we vow to wipe Israel off the map. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. This is our mission. This is what we are going to do. So, of course, there's concerns about that. Iran had an agreement already in regards to nuclear, enriching uranium and such. And part of that agreement was they said that, hey, okay, if any of your plants have issues, technical issues, you have to stop. And you cannot enrich uranium. And so all of their places had problems, right? They're still trying to gather these capabilities. They all had problems. So what they did is said, fine, we'll just build a new facility. There's no problems with a new facility. So they just built Natanz for doing this and trying to get around the treaty that they had agreed to previously. They did try to hide it for a while, but everyone pretty much knew what was going on in there. They didn't allow inspections. I think many of you probably remember this, back in the 2000s, where we were trying to get in there and figure out what was actually going on. And in 2006, they actually start enriching uranium at Natanz for the first time. So, again, like I said, everything is allegedly. So this operation was between the United States and Israel. Our two groups got together, the National Cyber Command and Unit 8200 from Israel. And oddly enough, Unit 8200, you probably heard about this last week, right? They're the ones thought to be behind the pager explosions that happened, the same group of people. It was called Operation Olympic Games, is what the code name was for it. And they had a few goals. And this is the part that really fascinates me, and we'll kind of touch on it. But, you could go over there and they could have just bombed the place, right? Just destroyed it, and that would be it, right? But they didn't want to do that. Their goals were, hey, we're going to slow you down in some way, some capacity, so you cannot enrich the uranium as fast as you want to. Make it expensive, and we'll see why that is as well. And lower their confidence level. So again, they're still gaining these capabilities, and anything we can do to put doubts in their head, like, man, we're doing something wrong here. Why is this not working? So those were the goals to do that, and they accomplished all three of those goals, and we'll see examples of that. This was approved under George Bush initially, and Barack Obama carried it on. He continued the program and actually accelerated it in some ways as well. And Israel really accelerated it, and that was part of the reason why this was eventually detected. Capabilities. So looking into this thing, into Stuxnet, when they created it, they wanted a few things that they had to have, right? It needed to be able to copy itself onto from removable devices. So think USB sticks, right? We need some way to get it into the plant and be able to make it spread, okay, within the plant. It was able to hide itself on Windows machines, so couldn't find it, just like a rootkit. It was very similar in that way, although this was way more sophisticated. There were several, it actually updated itself. Updatable malware, right? Kind of crazy. It was able to, get updates from a central command server in the later versions. And again, that's sort of where it's sort of spiraling out of control. And I'll talk about that again as well. Let's see. The two servers that it was contacting was reaching out to Malaysia and Denmark to get updates. And again, Natanz, and I think I'm going to talk about that on the next one. I'll come back to that. Continuing on there, we wanted to, once it was inside the network, it could find other hosts and be able to install itself across the network and propagate, and we'll see how that was done as well. And one of the ways, or the way pretty much, was it had 4 0 days in this one piece of malware, which was completely unheard of. There's nothing ever that has even happened to this day that has something like 4 0 days chained together to make this whole thing work. And again, on the updates, once it's on a USB drive, it's spread out into the wild outside of the facility. And if somebody had a thumb drive and they brought it back into Natanz and plug it in, it knew how to update all the other nodes on the network and would itself update itself from that way. So how did we get it in there? So this man, Eric von Saben, and again, allegedly, in 2005, he was recruited by the Dutch intelligence service to be somewhat of a spy. He is an industrial engineer, and he installed water pumps inside of Natanz. So he had the in to get into the place. According to his family, his wife, they had gone on vacation to Iran. His wife was Iranian. So they had gone on vacation there, and she, of course, she doesn't know what's going on, right? She's out of the loop. She says, it was just really weird. We were supposed to spend 2 weeks on vacation there, and we left after 1 day, and he was in a hurry to get out. And she just thought that was weird the entire time. So he plugged in the USB drive with STUXNET into a water pump. And from there, it got into the facility and just started spreading like wildfire fire within the facility. He actually died in a motorcycle accident in 2009. So not sure, no one has any definitive answers on that, or if that was truly a real accident or what happened there, but he's no longer with us. So, what was the effect? What did this thing actually do once it got installed? So, we managed to infect the Natanz, all the centrifuges, and the industrial control systems that ran those. They had Siemens Step 7 PLCs, right, programmable logic controllers, that drove these centrifuges. And enriching uranium is a bit tricky. It has to be exact, right? So these centrifuges are spinning and doing their thing for up to weeks or months at a time to be able to enrich this uranium. And what the main thing that it did was mess with the speeds of the centrifuges. So what it would do is spin them up real high over the course of like a day, spin them really low, and these things are prone, also these centrifuges are prone to vibrations, and you can't have vibration in these because it has to be exact. And when they would spin it down real low, it would slow down, and as they spun it back up, it would start to shake. And over the course of days or weeks, they would eventually explode, and the centrifuges would just destroy themselves. And like I said, this is kind of like the most fascinating part to me. Like if you're a bad guy, right? Man, let's just wreck those centrifuges, right? But they were tricky about it. They didn't want to do that. They didn't want to draw attention. They just messed with it just a little bit so that they would have questioning in their mind, hey, what's going on here? What am I doing wrong? And that did work because engineers were fired. The head of the nuclear program was fired because they're like, you guys are idiots. What's going on here? You guys can't enrich any uranium, and you're breaking all of our equipment. So that was the main way that happened. But clearly, they have dashboards. What's going, let's look, let's see what's going on. But they were all irrelevant. So what the STUXNET did was record 30 days of good information from the centrifuges, and they would play it back again through the industrial control system. So think about one of those, movies, right, where they're breaking into a bank, and on the closed caption TV, they're replaying some old video, so the guys don't have any idea. It was just like that. So to them, everything looked absolutely perfect. The way they accomplished that was there was an issue, a design flaw in the PCL where you could actually write to memory, specific memory locations that accepted the sensor's inputs, like the inputs from the centrifuge. How fast is it going? How hot is it? What's it doing? What's its status? And what they were doing, just overwriting the memory with the previous 30 days of good activity, so they had no idea what was going on. And again, that's kind of crazy, right? Because any PCL that's in, for critical infrastructure, right, that's driving this, our power plants and such, the idea that you could make it seem like everything is okay, I mean, that could be catastrophic, if that was able to, because, what are you going to do if nothing's wrong? You can't take any action to fix it because you don't know what's wrong. So they were overriding all the sensors inputs and making everything look like it was just perfectly fine. In fact, so there's a noise that comes out of these centrifuges. Think of like a jet engine almost, right? Like a whine that goes. And there's video of them taking a tour, the Iranians taking a tour through their brand new fancy facility, and you can kind of hear it on there. It's like a wee, kind of a whirring sound. And engineers eventually would start hearing wee and going kind of crazy. They're like, ah! and they hit the big red stop button. But that was intercepted as well and didn't do anything. So the things would still keep spiraling out of control, and they had no way to stop it and turn it off. So the big red button did nothing. So the discovery now, so that's what's happening here. And this went on for almost 3 years, right? 2007 to 2010 that we were in there and affecting their program. Like you saw, there were thousands of centrifuges that were destroyed, and it was really causing havoc for them. And again, they had no idea. But we got more aggressive, and I think the claims are that Israel got more aggressive. We were trying to keep it under the radar, and so they added that command and control feature, right? They had the ability to spread outside of the facility. And for them, from what I understand, is that it turned into, they had already been in there for years, and they're like, okay, fine, let's turn it into our own research project and see how far we can go with this. And they kept pushing and pushing. And then all of a sudden, virus total, malware researchers are like, what the hell is this STUXNET thing, that's showing up? It was discovered in Belarus, in Russia, through I can't remember what the company was. Had nothing to do with nuclear, of course. And when they started tracking STUXNET, it was all over the world. Lots of people were infected with this thing. And but there was a huge concentration in Iran. It was all red, right? Where STUXNET was the greatest area of infection. And so that got people thinking, okay, what is this thing? So it was submitted in June of 2010. It's kind of the first time it was, okay, hey, security researchers, let's start looking at this thing. And nobody knew what it was, had no idea. It was like 500K. It wasn't even all that big. A half a meg for all of this. Listening to interviews with some researchers from Symantec, they were the ones that kind of drove the lead on this project, just out of curiosity for the most part, like, hey, and one of the researchers is like, when we take a look at malware, it's like a 5 or 20-minute exercise to figure out what is it doing, why is it doing it, and figure it out. It took them 3 months to tear this thing apart. And listen to the researcher, he's like, the code was perfect. They had never seen malware like this. This wasn't script kiddies or anything. It was really good code. And again, looking through it, there's typical malware type stuff in there, but they also saw really bizarre, SCADA control codes, for instance, and like, what the hell is this thing doing in here? That doesn't make any sense either. It used it had certificates that were stolen, 2 certs stolen that they signed the malware with from random companies. And who knows how they got a hold of those certificates? I couldn't find any information on that. So again, while the malware is installed on Windows goes, and all, antivirus, for instance, is like, that's cool, it's signed, safe stuff. So that it never got flagged in that sense. Let's see, another researcher, Ralph, I hope I'm saying it right, Logner, had some fascinating talks. I watched some of his talks where he goes line by line through Stuxnet, if you really want to get deep down into the bytes and such, where he tears it apart, decompiles it, and goes through exactly everything that it's doing. So those were pretty interesting talks as well. Like I said, it used 4 0 days, unheard of. So let's take a look at some of those. Number one, and if you guys are from the Windows XP era, for instance, you probably know this one. When you plug in a USB drive, your Explorer window would open, and extensions with shortcuts, LNK files, they were able to actually execute code. So you didn't even have to click on the link. By the fact that you just open Explorer and you're looking at the thumb drive, you're done for. That was it. It would install itself, and that's all it took for that. So that's definitely the initial way how they got into there. Next 0 day, print spooler vulnerability. So this thing was able to run arbitrary code execution to, say, like installed software, basically do whatever they want. And so the way So everyone's probably familiar with the print spooler on their Windows box, right? Because you're yelling, why isn't it printing? You know, when you get angry at it. But it had a buffer overflow issue, and so the RPC call to say, hey, print this document, they could actually send it a file, and it would write to a location that Windows was polling every few seconds and just arbitrarily ran whatever files were in that folder. And that was like a Windows feature. That wasn't a vuln in that sense. The 0-day was, but as far as how that worked, it was expected behavior. But that's how they were able to reach out on the internal network for the most part, was using the print spooler vulnerability. Again, a 0-day, nobody knew. Next one, privilege escalation via task scheduler. So what they were able to do is they found, so like the print spooler vulnerability, they would use that to drop an XML file that told task scheduler what to do. And task scheduler runs as admin, of course, on your box. And so they were able to put into the task, basically run any task they want now with this vulnerability. Again, to further try to hide it and to distribute it and even try to remove it became more difficult as well, because it would just reinstall itself if you tried to remove it. So that became very frustrating too, and I think I'll talk about it on the next one. Oops. The next 0-day, privilege escalation, keyboard layout. So you guys know in the Windows, on the taskbar, there's a little keyboard, and you can change your language to, to English or German or what have you. That keyboard layout functionality had a 0-day, again, which gave you, they were able to raise their access permissions, do a privilege escalation, and again, be able to distribute or hide it and be able to spread that way. It gave the malware administrative control over any machine that was running on. So they were able to give themselves administrative privileges. And then related, Win32k Windows class vulnerability. So basically, it was a vulnerability in the way that they draw windows when your typical form, for instance, in an app, that it actually also had a buffer overflow issue. That was a 0-day. This one, let's see, actually, let me back up here. So I'll come back to that. So again, this is just another mechanism to try to raise its privileges and get admin access to the box, and again, distribute itself and hide itself in that sense. Going back to these two, let's see. So the task scheduler vulnerability was in Vista specifically, Windows, and God, please don't run a nuclear power plant on Vista. I mean, that's brutal. But so I watched a talk by one of the Microsoft researchers. So as soon as this came out, June, of course, a sample gets sent to Microsoft because they're like, how is this working, right? And that's when they kind of also discover all these 0-days. And hearing him talk about it with him and a buddy that were doing the research, it was pretty funny because, of course, they have a sandbox, they have an environment to try this. They'd plug in a thumb drive and bam, infected. Like, okay, well, what happened there? Oh, man, look at this. There's this, problem in task scheduler, right? And so he's working with a buddy, and he turns off task scheduler, makes sure that's not running, and his buddy plugs it in. He still gets infected. He's like, oh, WTF, what is going on here? Well, this one, the keyboard layout was only in Windows XP, so they made sure they had multiple support for multiple operating systems and used the correct 0-day to make sure they could, exploit those machines. But that was a really good talk where he figured out all the 0-days in like 3 days, but he was up all night because everybody from Microsoft was like, dude, you guys got to figure this out. What is going on here? So he was pretty fascinated by it too, and he didn't have any idea what its purpose was. He just cared about the 0-days and didn't realize what he was actually looking at and how important it was. So, again on discovery, this picture here. So again, okay, we have malware now, we have samples, We know it has all these 0 days. What is it doing? And again, people are looking, they're seeing SCADA codes, PLC type, tables and such within the malware. Still don't know what it is. Eventually they figure out, okay, this has to be for a Siemens controller, and probably, and because it's in Iran, they figure out, okay, it's for a nuclear facility, but we don't know which one. We don't know what's going, where the target is specifically. And so what they did is this, the Logner fellow who did the research also, he helped identify that it was Natanz specifically because of these videos that were, Iran was showing off all their equipment. And if you look, it's hard to see, but there's their controller right here. You see all those little green boxes, and there's 4 columns, and they figured, okay, that probably maps to their centrifuges. Okay, we can see there's 1 or 2 down. And when they looked at STUXNET, all of the arrays, the structs in the code, mapped exactly to these screenshots that they were showing in their videos. And so now they're thinking, okay, this is at Natanz. And that's how they started to narrow in where this was actually happening and what was going on. So I thought that was pretty fascinating how they figured that out. Another item of interest, many of these people are no longer with us. Several were assassinated, again, from these videos. Like, no one knew who the engineers were, and I don't know which nation state. Not going to blame anyone, but they definitely used these to identify people and, basically eliminate them out of there. So these videos had several consequences from them pushing those out. Symantec, this is one of the researchers here. They actually got the exact PCL because they wanted to see how this worked. And they installed their malware in their lab with this PCL, did the whole setup. Obviously, they didn't have centrifuges, but they did have like a little pump, an air pump, and he hooked a balloon up to it. Okay, and so they would issue a command. The balloon would kind of blow up, and then he would hit stop, and it would stop and go back down and do its thing. And they kept playing with it, and eventually it would go and start going up. He'd hit stop, and it wouldn't stop. It just kept going until it would blow up. And they were kind of, right then they were able to like, okay, this is what's going on here. So they were able to demonstrate how that worked using their own setup there. So the fallout, so kind of the wrap up here. Overall, Iran increased production by a little bit. A lot of experts say STUXNET was not successful. They were determined, and they just kept pushing harder and harder, even though all their centrifuges were exploding over time and all their samples were being ruined. They still tried to continue on in enriching uranium. They tried even harder, right? They felt emboldened. So once they figured out that they were infected, at first they were like, when STUXNET's story came out, they're like, nah, come on, man, but that's not, you guys can't do that to us. And all of a sudden now they're cleaning all their machines and getting rid of it. And then they really skyrocketed with their uranium enrichment. So it's kind of torn. It's definitely interesting, but was it successful? The jury's kind of still out on that. Here, it's probably really hard to see, but you can kind of see where the black line is the number of centrifuges they have, and you can see in that gap where it flattens out is when STUXNET was delivered, and when it was discovered, then you can see the number of centrifuges just kind of skyrocketed there. And the amount of uranium, which is the dotted line that's on there also. You can tell they definitely had problems during the STUXNET years, and then they definitely ramped that up once they figured out what was going on. So again, if it was successful or not, that's kind of up for debate. Eventually, they reached an agreement. Sanctions were in place, right? So USA and other countries really came down hard on them. And they figured, well, maybe we need a more diplomatic approach than cyber warfare. So they were able to work with Iran, and they had an agreement in 2015 where they agreed, hey, we'll stop or control it. and you guys lift the sanctions. So eventually that is what happened, that they went the diplomatic route. I think Iran was pretty pissed off about this. They did actually try to attack us back. So a couple of examples. DDoS attacks in 2011 came from Iran. So they were targeting our financial institutions, all the biggest banks, Bank of America, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, right, just denial of service attacks, maybe not a huge deal, but it was there. Cause some outages and slowdowns, so, they had that. 2013, they tried to attack our energy sector. So they were trying to access industrial control systems exactly similar to what STUXNET did. And they saw this traffic coming and were able to analyze that. They were never successful with it, though. But we saw it, and they were concerned because clearly Iran was stepping up their cyber warfare abilities. They didn't think to this point they had those capabilities, but now we're able to see what they were able to do. And so it did raise concerns, but fortunately it was not successful. In 2013, they attacked a dam in New York. And I saw pictures of this dam. It's not the Hoover Dam. This is like a little, like a beaver dam type thing. But it did have a controller on that thing as well, industrial controller to open doors or close the gates. And they did gain access to that, but it did very little damage. It wasn't all that important of a dam, I guess. But again, it did raise concerns about Iran's capabilities and what they're able to do. And with that, that is the conclusion. So I'm open for questions, or if anyone else has interesting tidbits, I would love to hear it. Yes?
Given that STUXNET had the ability to read-write on programmable computers, PLCs, how were they able to remove STUXNET using USBs, which are a form of PLCs?
So how did they get rid of Stuxnet, are you saying? Or?
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly how. I imagine once they knew what it was, then they knew what they were dealing with. And like removing a rootkit, for instance, it probably came down to that same deal. The overriding memory was kind of interesting in the PLC, that it's sort of thought that, that Siemens knew about it, and they were encouraged not to fix it. So that they could continue these operations and continue on. So I imagine they did fix that flaw as well on the PLC. Remember, the rootkit wasn't installed on the PLC. It was installed on the controllers that were, like those windows that were driving that would send the signals to the PLCs and tell them what to do with the centrifuges. Yeah. Yes?
I think Valsmith found that 2 years before Stuxnet used it. Valsmith was a pen tester as part of a group called Attack Research, and they reported it to Microsoft, and they said it was just like intended functionality. And so like a lot of bugs that get reported to Microsoft that are configuration bugs, they don't receive a lot of love through the bug bounty or the reporting mechanism, and then they end up as parts of stuff like this. So did you ever hear about any of that, like red teams finding these things before they even end up in nation state malware?
Yeah, I heard about that exact example, and actually I had 5 under 0 days. There were 5. I showed 5, and because one of them they said like you said was not considered a 0 day, but it was still pretty bad, and that it was known and just nothing was done about it. I didn't hear that Microsoft chose not to fix it. I didn't hear that part, so that is interesting. But yeah, I did hear about that too, about one of them not being quite a 0 day because it was known. Yeah. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry. Who's up? Oh,
yeah. So was USB the only method by which they were able to infiltrate the system? Question number one. 2 is, were there other early warning signs which indicated that these systems were being infected?
Yeah, so my understanding is it was only by USB. Natanz was air-gapped, completely air-gapped, as it probably should be. So my understanding is it was only USB, removable drives or what have you, that were able to carry in updates and initially do the infection. That is my understanding there. And the second part was, what was it?
Early warning signs. Early warning signs.
None. For the Iranians, none. They had no idea until Symantec and it got submitted to VirusTotal. Then everyone started knowing about it, and again they denied it. Like, there's no way you're inside our systems. Forget that, you know. And then they realized they were. So even they were denying it. So they had no warning signs. In fact, no one did. Like I said, there were updates, and when I had mentioned that Israel kind of turned it into their own lab, like, hey, all right, let's just go to town here. Let's put in command and control, self-updating, let it spread. And that's really what, had they not done that, it probably could have been a lot longer operation that, you know, but once it started spreading across the globe because it got out and spreading, initially it was meant to only spread if it identified the location it was at, like it found the Siemens controller, for instance. But that just went out the window, and they were just like, hey man, let's just shove this into everything. So yeah, they didn't have any idea until it was, you know, brought to their attention.
How did it prevent it from coming back to the U.S.?
No, it was here. STUXNET was here. It was all around the globe on your computer, your home PC, your own Windows machine. Infections were around the globe, but it didn't do anything. The initial, like I said, in Belarus, when it was found, they had, at the company where they were complaining, their computer was burning itself up. It was just, you know, and they couldn't figure out why. And so someone came, and it was STUXNET doing something bizarre, or whatever their environment was. It was just chewing up the CPU and its resources, and that was the initial finding, like, okay, I don't know why. Maybe it was an accounting firm or something. It had nothing to do with nuclear. So that's how it was originally found.
Thank you. Along the similar lines of the early warning signs, as like an industrial operator now, what do you think the main lessons are that are applicable to ICS security now?
I'm not a, you know, critical infrastructure guy or, you know, physical, you know, those types of intrusions. Like I said, I'm more on the AppSec side. You know, I'm not sure I have a good answer. I wouldn't want to answer probably because I'm not the, you know, an expert in that area. But man, you know, it seemed like they did everything right? They were air-gapped. They had protections in place, just, you know, all these 0 days and stuff they didn't know about. I mean, I wonder if there's anything that could have been done, right, to protect it even better, other than don't allow USB, you know, thumb drives to even get into the place. Maybe that's a good first step in that case. Yeah. We had one over here. Yeah.
I'll be very loud. I don't like it when people do that. Give me the mic. Given the goals that you cited in one of your early slides to slow them down, to make it more expensive and so forth, you said that some experts considered that this was a failure, but it seems like it met the goals that at least you had enumerated there. So I'm just wondering, what's your take on that? Did STUXNET accomplish the objectives that some alleged people allegedly thought it might allegedly accomplish?
Yeah, I think it depends which side you're on. As a cybersecurity guy, I think it was hugely successful because that was awesome. As far as like you know, killing their nuclear program, it wasn't successful, right?
Right. But that,
so, what's that? Yeah, it delayed it for sure, but it didn't really do as much damage as they had hoped.
I wonder if anybody's done a similar sort of analysis on the effectiveness of the diplomacy.
Right, yeah. Yes, in the back. Sorry, I don't mean to pick the furthest person away from you every time. You have to stretch first.
Yeah, did this have any, since this was worldwide, it did affect other IC systems, did this have any effect as far as disclosures, both in internal like companies like Microsoft and Siemens, Rockwell, but also in the diplomacy department as far as like nation states, like, hey, this got out, did it add any methods for those nation states to let those companies know, hey, by the way, you know, this kind of got out once all the dust settles, or did this basically they just said, sorry, you caught me?
Yeah, it's hard to say, right? Because this was, you know, still no one has claimed who did this, right? So who's going to speak up and say, hey, sorry, we let this thing out. As far as, you know, being found in other countries and such, I mean, I'm not sure of a good answer on that one myself. It's kind of a weird scenario. So yeah, I don't have a great answer for you on that. Jason.
One more question, and we need to wrap up.
Okay. Jason?
So kind of a follow-up to my original question. Do you feel like, I mean, like, what's your opinion on those of us who do offensive security research and release, you know, public proof of concepts on GitHub or blogs or things like that, and then it gets used by cyber operators for nation states? Do you think it's ethical for us to be releasing research, or should we scale back more?
Wow, that's a tough one. That's a loaded question. I think it's incredibly dangerous. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but of course you're posting, you know, POC, you know, proof of concept exploits against things that are, you know, devices that are used in, you know, critical infrastructure, for instance, that, I don't know, it could, but that's how we learn, right, is you find that stuff. So 50-50 on that. I don't know if I have a good answer on that.